Alright, so this video concerns Gibson, the first chapter. And so in this first chapter, Gibson is going to do a number of things, but what concerns us in this class is his discussion of values and the different ways to think about value and how that relates to business, obviously, and business ethics. So the first thing I want to focus on is this distinction between descriptive versus value claims. So descriptive claims simply state that something is the case. They simply say, this is how the world operates. This is, in fact, what happens. Value claims, on the other hand, state that this is how the world ought to be, or this is what you should do. So value claims don't describe, they say what should occur. And if something is occurring, they're saying, well, that's what ought to occur. And to not have that action be performed in the future would be wrong. Okay, so again, descriptive claims simply say, this is what the case is, this is how the world operates, these are the facts, whereas value claims say, this is how the world ought to operate, should operate. And so those words ought and should are really important. Key indicators of a value claim versus a descriptive claim. So how is this related to business? Well, in one sense, you might say that many people would assume business is simply based on descriptive claims. That's all that business cares about. That they are simply worried about how to make a profit and gain market share. And so the business people are simply interested in how, in fact, you do that. Whereas others might argue that, look, no, certainly a primary goal, maybe the primary goal is profit, but there are other goods, there are other values that limit your ability to do whatever you want. And so these would be value claims. These would be claims that say, look, even if you think you can make a great profit, even if this is the way to make a great profit, if it violates a central value claim, if it violates something that you ought not to do, then you shouldn't do it. And many people would say, even though the popular perception or the kind of superficial idea is that businesses do whatever it takes and are simply interested in descriptive claims, others might argue, no, there is value claims that limit, at least to a certain extent, what business people do. Okay, how's it related to Machiavelli? Well, Machiavelli is really actually surprisingly complex here. So one could read him as making a kind of hypothetical value claims. If you want power, then this is what you ought to do. This is what you should do. You should look at every value and every action in terms of whether it's useful or not useful to gaining power. And then just do whatever you can. Do whatever action is going to lead to you getting power, gaining the good result. So in that regard, he could be making a kind of value claim. And one might also read him as saying, look, power is the ultimate value. Power is the only thing that's important, and therefore you should do whatever it takes to gain power. And if you're not doing that, you're doing something wrong. On the other hand, people could read him as making just a series of descriptive claims. He could be read as saying, look, this is just the way you gain power. This is how you actually do it. In the world, the way it operates today, these are the actions, and these are the behaviors, and this is the perspective that is going to lead you to attain power. And you could read him as saying, look, I'm not saying this is how the world should be or ought to be, or that everyone ought to pursue power. He could be read as simply saying, well, if you want it, then here I'm just describing different ways to get it. Okay, and so that debate is a really interesting debate and worth thinking about. Now, another type of distinction, but a distinction that's very much related to the difference between descriptive and value claims is that of intrinsic and instrumental values. So these are two approaches to values. And the intrinsic approach says that there are some values that are fundamentally important, that ought not to be violated no matter the consequences, even though they might be really beneficial to you, of violating these values. They're saying certain things are fundamentally right, and other things are fundamentally wrong. Instrumental values, on the other hand, are saying, look, the way we look at values, the way we should look at values, is simply to say everything, every value, every action, every behavior should be looked upon as a means to an end. So what is valuable is what brings about good consequences for you or your company. Okay. Now, Gibson makes this point, and I think many of us, if we think about it a little bit, it's really plausible, really makes sense. Gibson says, oftentimes there's an overlap between the instrumental value approach and the intrinsic value approach. Oftentimes, the instrumentalist will be doing the same things that the intrinsic value person is also doing. The instrumentalist might be honest, might be generous, might be trustworthy, might be fair, values that would all be intrinsically worthwhile, intrinsically right, fundamentally good, but doing it not because they're fundamentally good, but doing it because that's what gets you a profit. And Gibson looks at two case studies that are really relevant to this point. He looks at the idea of Nike, and he looks at some research based on eBay. And so Nike got in big trouble a while ago, and they got in trouble because they were running a series of sweatshops, or at least they had subcontracted out their products to factories that were run as sweatshops. And so these were people being paid low wages, poor working conditions, long hours, lack of benefit. And the real outrage began when this was revealed, and it began because you had these really, really poor people working, 12 hours a day for $2 or $1, and yet selling this shoe for $100. And so the discrepancy there between the vast amount that was being charged for the shoe versus the minuscule amount that was being paid to the workers really caused people to be angry. And it hurt Nike. It hurt their stocks. It hurt their profits. And it took them a while to really recover from this. And they did recover. Their image is largely repaired. And they run factories that have better conditions now. And the workers are paid a little bit more. And so the instrumentalist might say, well, all along, Nike, you should have stayed away from those sweatshops because that image is going to be bad for you, and you should pay your workers a fair wage. You should give them decent working hours. You should give them some form of benefits. Again, not because it's fundamentally right, but because it would be beneficial to you. The Machiavellian, again, could look at this as very much an instrumentalist approach and ask, okay, well, how much were you hurt by this revelation? How great were your profits because of this? How much in terms of profits would you have lost if you had always been honest from the very beginning? And kind of go from there. So Machiavellian might say, well, was it the wrong thing to do? It depends if this action overall lost Nike more money. If it didn't, then yeah, that running the sweatshops until you're discovered was a good move. If running the sweatshops really fundamentally put Nike back, and they lost a good deal of market share and profit because of it, the Machiavelli would say, no, you shouldn't do it. Okay. Now what I want to do is a key point to think about here is, does this matter in a certain sense? Does it matter whether you use intrinsic or instrumental values? Does it matter whether you base your actions on purely descriptive criteria versus value claim criteria? And to think about this, I want to kind of just give you a story of a car mechanic. So a car mechanic in Washington, D.C., my brother was coming back. We're all coming back, in fact, from Charleston, South Carolina. We were at my brother's wedding. And on the way back, my brother's car really ran into some trouble. It broke down. And we had already kind of left. The family was already ahead. So he didn't have any other option but to go to this mechanic in D.C. with his family. And he was charged an outrageous amount. Now, with the car mechanic, the question is, well, what should you do? This is kind of an out-of-towner. That they're not going to be coming back. You know that they're probably not going to say anything to anyone in that area. So, should you rip them off? Should you charge an outrageous price? And certainly for a Machiavellian, the question would be, well, what is going to make you the most overall profit and gain you the most market share? And do that. The intrinsic value person would say, no, you should be honest, you should treat them fairly and compassionately, even if you could make more money off them. And a value claim would say, no, you shouldn't kind of rip them off. So for a Machiavellian, for kind of an instrumentalist, the question would be, should you do it? And certainly you could argue that you should, that for the reasons that I already gave, that these are out-of-towners, they're not coming back, it's not like they're going to be a repeat customer, it's not like they're going to talk to anyone in that area immediately, so yeah, go for it. But an instrumentalist or Machiavellian could also argue that no, you shouldn't, because, especially in today's day and age, right? I mean, you can write a bad review. You can put it on Angie's List or Yelp, and you can communicate this poor action to others. And that could ultimately hurt the reputation of the company and, in the end, hurt their business. Because mechanics, particularly car mechanics, are one of those industries where it is really important to trust your car mechanic, that they are being honest with you. And so you could argue from an instrumentalist Machiavellian approach that it would be the wrong thing to do. All right. So these are different perspectives. Again, it really boils down to whether you're motivated by just pure self-interest, by the beneficial consequences that you can gain from it, or whether you're motivated by fundamental moral values. Now, in terms of one final case or thought or concept, this is the idea of the prisoner's dilemma. And there's a separate YouTube video that I posted online that is part of NU Learn. You get to watch it. But essentially what the prisoner's dilemma boils down to is this question of, does it make sense to rip people off for your benefit? And the answer tends to be, well, it depends on whether you're going to see this person again. In one-time encounters, it makes more sense to try to rip the person off. But if you are going to be involved in a relationship with this customer, and multiple occasions, then it makes less sense. And so that's what the prisoner's dilemma talks about. All right.